What is going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the ABJ Podcast, episode 93. Rolling along here, getting super close to that 100 mark. Super excited for tonight's interview. Speedball Mike Bailey, you've seen him everywhere. I mean, if you're not watching independent pro wrestling, Impact Pro Wrestling, Twitch. I mean, he's all over the place. The guy's an absolute animal and killing it out there. So much to cover here. Make sure you check all the links below for not just myself, but for my guests, for merchandise, how to support, follow them on social media. All that stuff will be below. Right now, sponsor wise, we just hit a little bit of a limbo spot. So if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, hit me up and we'll love to have you as a sponsor. So make sure you guys check that out as well. And let's get right into it because time is limited. Like I said, all over the place, traveling. I don't want to waste too much time here with this interview. Let's get this one started right away. Let me bring in my guest, Speedball, Mike Bailey.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. You know, he's everywhere is the number one thing that people say about me or to me when they see me, especially if they haven't seen me for a long time, is, hey, nice to see you, man. You're everywhere.
I used to get that a lot too before my car died. They're like, man, you're everywhere I'm looking. I'm like, that's how you grow. You don't grow by sitting in your house. You got to get out there. You got to make the rounds. You got to see the people, got to kiss the babies and all that fun stuff.
That is literally the only way to do it. If you're like in any kind of content grind, you have to be everywhere, whether that's like physically everywhere all over the world or just all over the internet from your home. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah. And that's one thing I really respect with you is your work ethic and your grind, and someone who is attempting to do the same thing by putting in that grind and that work ethic. You're an inspiration and someone I set my standards to that level to get to that level as well. But one thing I want to say right off the bat, and I kind of made a post about this on social media after the last Fighter Entertainment show, is for how much work you put in to getting your name out there and being as good as you are at your craft, and all that time that it takes to be a content creator, to be a professional wrestler, to do what you're doing on so many levels. Fighter Entertainment to me is a huge indication of who you are as a person, because those are shows that you're putting together. You're doing them way out of where you're from, in a small little town in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, at Tony Deppin's brewery, and you have opportunities to bring people in and do that and run those shows. But you're bringing in people who are in their early in their career, like their first year, their first couple months, and giving them a platform to not only be seen, but give them matches that are absolutely insane, and just working with people that on this level to give them the opportunities to work with you and the Jordan Olivers and the Joey Janela's and all those people out there to advance their career and help them along the way. And like I said, that work ethic you're putting into for your brand, but then to pass it on to somebody else at such an early spot in their career says a lot about you as a person.
Thank you. There's a lot of what Fighter Entertainment is that I am really shows what I'm passionate about within pro wrestling and just life in general. When I started in professional wrestling, it was in Canada in 2005. Like before social media, before you could advertise your wrestling show on Facebook or wherever, and the only way to really do it was to staple the flyers to telephone poles, which does not get you a good draw, typically.
No.
There was no money being made in professional wrestling, and it was rough. There was very little access to good professional wrestling, and most of the people that were performing on the shows were just people that had been doing it since for a long time, back when there was some money to be made before it all fully died down, and the only wrestling they were ever able to watch was WWE or F or whatever was on TV at the time, and that really did not apply to what the audiences at the time wanted to see or cared about, because it couldn't be further from TV. Most of the shows weren't even filmed. It was a completely different thing, and I think that context in pro wrestling is extremely misunderstood. Of course, WWE for the longest time and now kind of AEW are at the top of the heap. So that's what people are trying to do, and that's what most of the wrestling attempts to be. But it's not what most pro wrestling promotions or professional wrestlers are doing. Do you know what I mean? And I think Fighter Entertainment is a great example of that, in that it is, it's in a brewery. It's small. The audience is right there. And so, of course, you have to present a different kind of show for them than you do if we were filming a TV show in that brewery.
Yeah. And from someone who, that's my backyard, like that's my home. That's when I got into this industry, I said to myself, like, man, I wish there was more professional wrestling or fightertainment or stunt fighting, as you will, in our area, because I feel like there's such a demand for it, and there's so many fans out here, and there's so many people who used to be fans but maybe aren't into it anymore. So I knew, like, as soon as it comes to this area, it's gonna be popular, and that crowd is so giving. Like, they're into it from the second it starts to the second it's over, and it's fun. It's, even if, like, there's people who I sit next to and I have conversations with the whole show, and they're like, well, who is this person? Because they're still learning people themselves, because they're just coming to a brewery and seeing some, and I'm like, you have no idea the matchups you're getting here today. Like, some of these matchups are dream matchups that you're not going to see unless you're here tonight. And it's a good indication of, like, we got Jordan Oliver versus Griffin McCoy in a brewery show, and they went off. Like, they didn't have to go as hard as they went, with no ropes, no ring, and Cheeseburger is the referee. Like, how does that happen?
Griffin McCoy and Jordan Oliver, during that little bit of a, like, half Jenga, half fightertainment four-way matchup, put on, like, world-class, high-level, technical, professional wrestling that had, like, that should have no business being presented on slippery ring mats on a beer-wetted brewery floor. But yet here we are, and that's what makes it so fun. You know, I think there's a big demand for interaction, and I think there's so much great media that you can consume from home and just watch. But I think when people go out to something like a fightertainment show or a pro wrestling show, which is completely different, obviously, they want that interaction, and they want to be close, and they want to get involved. And so that's kind of the whole point behind it.
I love how the shows have progressed to the point where the talent now goes, if I ask for a beer, I'm going to get a free one. So, like, towards the end, I'm just like, where's my beer? And, like, it's if you're in the area, please go check that out. Pilgrim Brewing Company, go follow them on social media, our Mike, to find out when the next ones are coming up, as well as watch them on at Speedball Mike Bailey on Twitch. They're completely free on there. And then afterwards you edit them and then put them on YouTube for more camera angles that maybe you don't get to see on the live stream as well.
So we're in the process of, I cut the matches apart from the last one. Veda Scott and I are dropping commentary on those, and we'll put them up on my YouTube channel very soon.
Yeah, and I appreciate, I last time I came, I was like, man, how can I help any way possible? So I bring in some stuff to try to help you guys out. I love what you're doing. Please come back and keep filming there and making great content, because we love having you. And then a little bit of news here. When this airs, we're not really sure. I mean, it'll probably happen after, but big announcement just recently came up. Impact Wrestling, you're going to be working right now. They're saying arguably the top guy in this industry in Will Ospreay, and that's going to happen at Impact Wrestling, which is interesting because he's kind of in limbo, where he's in Japan or he's AEW, and now he's crossing the lines over to Impact Wrestling, and you get picked for that matchup. How do you feel about this? I mean, you said you have worked him before, but now on this stage where he's coming off, Wembley Stadium, his hometown, coming off some big matches in Japan with Kenny Omega and then AEW, and now you get him in your home promotion in Impact Pro Wrestling. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, Will Ospreay is doing quite a bit with Impact, so he's going to do that match with me at Bound for Glory in Chicago, but then he's with them for the whole UK tour they have coming up afterwards. But I mean, of course, this is a big match. Will and I have wrestled before. We've had 4 matches that were all great, including one for, I don't know if you're familiar with the What Culture Pro Wrestling World Cup.
I have never seen it, but I am familiar with it.
So if you're someone who consumes wrestling through YouTube, you probably have seen it. But so What Culture Wrestling, What Culture is still a thing, right?
Yes. I actually got to meet all those guys when I was in London. They were at the Defy show because Simon Miller wrestled there.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. But yeah, they started to put on a pro wrestling promotion. It was the most insane, just independent wrestling that had ever been put on. They had Cody Rhodes, they had Drew Galloway. They had Jim Ross on commentary for a couple shows for
It's so
no good
crazy.
reason, by the way. And so they decided to do this Pro Wrestling World Cup kind of things where they had like qualifiers from every single country. And like they had shows in Canada that were qualifiers from the What Culture World Cup, and they had like the Japan qualifiers in England, and they just put a ton of money behind this huge tournament that culminated to like a series of shows in England. I think the finals were Will Ospreay versus Kushida, and Kushida won it. But in the quarterfinals, that was my third match with Will Ospreay. First one at PWG, second one at Revolution Pro, and then this third one. But this is maybe my match on YouTube that has the most views at this point. I'm not sure if my
look into that one.
I'm not sure if my hour-long match with Josh Alexander has gotten more views than that one over time, but for a while this was really the one. If you put in Speedball Mike Bailey versus on YouTube, it would be that Will Ospreay match. And there's a ton of people that have come up to me and been like, "Oh, this is the first match I saw of yours. It's awesome," which is why I'm so excited to do it again, because it happened in 2017, 6 years ago, and I think that Will and I are both 10 times the performers that we were then. Now, so all I really want is to get to do it again in front of an even bigger audience at Impact Wrestling, and it's at Cicero Stadium, where Impact has arguably its hottest crowds right now. So yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah, Impact Wrestling is I go to a lot of places online and we talk professional wrestling, whether it be on live streams, but a lot of times people are covering the AEWs and the WWEs of the world, and I feel like Impact is just right under that radar. And the biggest thing I say all the time is the youth that's behind that roster right now, with names like you, Ace, Masha. I mean, the list goes on. Arguably, in my opinion, the best women's division in professional wrestling at Impact Wrestling right now. Like, I just feel like what they're doing in the storylines, that people need to stop sleeping on Impact Wrestling and what's going on over there. It's really good. The storylines are fun. I really like what's happening there. How does it feel being part of that X division? Recently had the title there for a little bit. Now it's between a few different people, but what is the vibe right now coming off that 1000th episode and where Impact is and being part of that roster?
There are a lot of big things in store for Impact. They put out a press release recently saying how they're revamping all the production studio and stuff, and they've got some very, very big venues, much bigger venues lined up for next year. So they've got some big things in store, but I think Impact has always done a great job being, at the forefront of things, seeing where things are going and kind of headed there before anyone else does. And historically, sometimes that hasn't worked out super well for them, but it's working out great right now. I mean, in Toronto, Deonna Purrazzo versus Trinity for the Knockouts World Championship as the main event of a big pay-per-view. That is a big deal.
Yeah.
To have Knockouts main eventing the pay-per-view and putting on an absolute, like, a match that's as good as you're going to get from anyone in the world. But I think just, not only that, but Impact was one of the only places for a very, very long time that gave cruiserweights and smaller wrestlers and literally anyone who was good at wrestling a chance at putting on main events and getting big matches with the X division. And so I really think you have that energy where they're going to give anyone a chance and see if it works, and without any like formula or no, we know what works. They let the audience decide, and I think that's what really amazing about working for Impact.
Yeah, one other thing about Impact I really enjoy is how they let their talent go out and still work on the scene. I know a lot of companies that could be really dangerous because you put a lot of time and effort into a talent and then they go work a show somewhere else and the risk of injury is out there. But like working at a lot of promotions, and I had Moose come in and all the like Deanna and all these names who come to the independent scene and then go out and they're representation of Impact Wrestling, and they carry that banner and they're all proud to be part of that roster and saying, we want this to be on the forefront. We want people to talk about this promotion as much as they're talking about the AEWs and the WBs of the world. And that represent like what they're doing out there on the forefront is just working that indie shows and getting the name of Impact. Everyone has just been amazing at that on that level. And it's for me, it's a reason why I root for that company so hard too, is because you're able to see them on Impact, but then see them on the scene and at meet and greets and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with the schedule that Impact has, where the TV is taped. It's not live, because why should it be live? I don't even know if that makes sense or if that's that important nowadays. But we tape, once or twice a month. We'll tape 4 or 2 episodes in a live event. And so that gives up a lot of free time for us to go and do whatever we want, perform on indie shows, go around the world, travel to Japan or Mexico. I'm getting to go to Australia for 2 weeks with a little show in Japan in between all that. But yeah, it's really great. And I think they do a great job understanding where wrestling is and how people consume it. The Impact YouTube channel is honestly the star of the show for me. They will upload a majority of the matches. Bound for Glory is coming up. They just uploaded Masha versus Jordan Grace for the Knockouts World title that aired at Bound for Glory last year. They air nearly every single match that appears on TV in its entirety on the YouTube channel. Plus, you can watch the shows live on there for like $2 a month. I mean, I think it always makes me laugh, because I know it's important to like networks and monetarily, but the ratings discussion when it comes to pro wrestling always seems so silly, because I don't even know how they gather that data anymore, or how really relevant it is to like the income of a company.
Yeah. The biggest thing when people talk about Impact that holds them back is the TV. Like, they're on Access, but Access isn't on a lot of like YouTube TV or Hulu TV, which right now are the forefront of how people consume TV right now. Like, not everyone has satellite or cable anymore. They go to that streaming service, which is good, because that means people are like, I want to see it. But how you're saying is that $2 a month YouTube, it's live there, or you can go to Impact Plus and get it that way, or just wait a little bit and it'll be all on YouTube. So there are different avenues to see it. And I think that's where the representation of talent going out in the scene and being like, hey, if you want to see us, this is how to do it. That helps, because I think that's the biggest question that people have of how do I consume Impact Professional Wrestling?
Yeah, my main answer to that is just on YouTube, man. Start there.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's kind of backtrack here for a moment. When is your earliest memory of being a professional wrestling fan?
So I remember very specific moment, flipping through the channels and seeing Kane try to set the Brood on fire in, I think, like 1997 or 6 or 8, maybe. I'm not sure of the exact date. But watching and seeing that on TV and immediately deciding I was going to be a professional wrestler. And then me and my brother
just person to say a Kane moment. Is there break into professional wrestling?
Which makes
Rocket
sense, because
from H2O is the other one who said Kane versus Shane McMahon got him into professional wrestling.
But so that makes perfect sense. He's incredibly flashy. It's a big character. There's a guy in a ring trying to set people on fire or whatever the hell he was doing. And then, it just hooks you in. And the second that happened, me and my brother took our mattresses off our beds and just started trying wrestling moves immediately. They didn't even have time to show us the "don't try this at home" little vignettes. We just tried it at home immediately.
So from then on, were you just absolutely hooked? And it became a big part of your life just from that moment forward?
1,000%. And from then until now, I wanted to be a professional wrestler. If you asked a young Speedball between like 7 and, I want to say 13, until people had told me, no, that's not possible, you can't do that, enough that I stopped saying it, even though I still believed it. And you asked me when teachers asked me what I wanted to be, it was always, I want to be a pro wrestler.
Yeah. So growing up, sports, what were you involved in sports, and how did that attribute to, hey, this is my blueprint? Obviously you can't go to pro wrestling class in high school. So you have those options of, in America, American football, soccer, baseball, collegiate wrestling. What avenues did you take in that aspect?
So I am terrible at anything with a ball. Like, I remember playing Little League Baseball and being literally the worst player. But when I was 11, randomly, I wasn't even like into martial arts and didn't like want to do them and wasn't like a big like Bruce Lee fan or anything like that. But I had a friend who was doing Taekwondo and was like, hey, do you want to come and try out a class? And I was like, sure. And I enjoyed it. And in the back of my mind, it was like, this will be really useful when I start pro wrestling eventually.
I love that.
And there was
Yeah.
times in my life before I could go to pro wrestling school, and when I did just start pro wrestling, where Taekwondo was a lot more important. I was very involved in the competing, and you know, and teaching Taekwondo and all of that. And it was before wrestling was, you know, as big of a part of my life as it was now. Taekwondo was a lot more important, and it was for a long time. But you know, ultimately, I was correct in the martial arts thing would work out in pro wrestling, because that's most of what I do in a pro wrestling ring nowadays.
Yeah, I mean when you think of Speedball Mike Bailey, you think of that Taekwondo style, you think of the legs, you think of your strikes and just kicking people's faces off. It's it's absolutely amazing. Who would have thought years later that Taekwondo would come in handy trying to remove a jingle block with your feet? You know what I mean? But yeah, so how far did that Taekwondo take you? Did it take you to a level where you had actual matches like on an adult level, or was it just like it got you like that base to take into professional wrestling?
No, I competed in Taekwondo for a very long time. I mean, I was a national runner-up at one point. I did a lot of like, I didn't compete internationally that much. Like I traveled to the U.S. a couple times, but I was provincial champion or number one in Quebec in my weight class for a very, very long time. Even as an adult, I competed up until I was like 24 years old. I want to say, I think that's when I did my last tournament, when it came time to, so the problem with Taekwondo, and a lot of reason why it was short-lived for me, and it is for a lot of people. And I remember there was a bunch of people from Quebec that made the Olympics in, I want to say 20, I'm trying to remember the Olympics years, 2014 maybe, but they all retired immediately after, just because it cost them so much money and took them so much time, and there is no funding from Canada, from Taekwondo Canada or the government or anything. So there was a time where it's like, okay, you could go and do this competition, and you're going to have to train really hard. You're going to have to cut a bunch of weight. You're going to have to pay your competition fees and pay for your hotel, or you can go and do this pro wrestling show and actually get paid for it.
Yeah. How much did the landscape change with like Taekwondo, or trying to shift over to the MMA style things, with like the rise of like the GSP in that area? Like everyone's like, oh, he's like the dominant guy in the world in mixed martial arts and that Taekwondo. Like when you're in a field like Taekwondo, how is there that pressure to say, hey, you should learn jiu-jitsu, hey, you should jump into boxing, hey, you should learn, collegiate wrestling? Is that something in that industry, or is it just like when you're in Taekwondo, they just kind of stick you in that one spot?
So for the longest time, to me, Taekwondo was really treated as a sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Taekwondo that I did was clearly like, the school advertised itself as the school, which was ironically called Impact Taekwondo.
I love that.
Yeah, which is a lot of. So I still have my on my belt that I wear to the ring, with my. On one side is my four dans, fourth degrees, and then on the other side it says Impact Taekwondo, which people think is like a joke, but no, it's the actual name of the school where I trained and got my black belt. But no, it really advertised itself as Olympic Taekwondo, and I think that was an important part to me joining, because I don't think as a young man I would have been attracted to traditional martial arts without seeing the like practical application. But the way it was presented was, this is a sport, right? This is not, we're aware that you can't use this to take a gun out of someone's hands, or, defend yourself against 4 different opponents in the streets. And we didn't do, like, there was not a very big emphasis on like forms or katas, as they call them in karate, or all that. It was really focused on the sport and the practical application, which was great. And I think Taekwondo, just because of the way it evolved, actually moved further away from like martial arts and kickboxing, and became more safe and more, more concentrated on technique and like light contact, than when I did it. It's changed a lot. And when I did it, it was, corner judges and people just kicking each other really hard. And now there's like electronic helmets and chest guards, and you have to like make contact, and you get extra points for turning and like spinning techniques and stuff, which I think is cool. I think is neat. I think the best, like the reason you should sign your kids up for Taekwondo in 2023 is because they'll be able to do a essentially full contact fighting sport with very little risk of, injury or head trauma, and still learn the footwork that'll serve as a fantastic base for anything, like any other fighting sport they might want to do later. But yeah, I definitely think it's moved further away from MMA. But
Yeah.
I did boxing for a while too. Like tried really hard. I did one boxing match. When I was like, I don't remember, 20, 22 something. I hurt my knee at Taekwondo, and so I couldn't really kick. So I decided, well, I'm gonna go learn to punch in the meanwhile, and that was really fun. But again, it was the same thing where I would have loved to do more fights, but I was pro wrestling and making money at that, so it was hard to find the time to actually take a match. But
Yeah.
yeah, since pro wrestling, I've kind of dabbled in every martial art there is.
I love that. Well, like I said, it pays off for what you do in professional wrestling, because the best part is that you want to make it look real. And I think one of the biggest things that makes people struggle in the industry is their strikes. If they don't know how to throw a legit strike, or a safe strike, we'll say, behind the curtain, peel the curtain back a little bit, it doesn't translate well. And I believe that is not something that is your problem in this industry. How did you translate then from Taekwondo, finding a wrestling school, and then getting into this, start following that path into pro wrestling?
So the thing is, I barely found a wrestling school. I barely had a wrestling school, and I don't know that there were any good like formal places to learn professional wrestling in Canada in 2005. My older brother, when he was 16 and I was 14, trained at the IWS wrestling school with Beef Wellington and Sami Zayn, who were the head coaches at the time, who probably didn't really have any business teaching pro wrestling, because again, this is many, many years ago, and they were not, I don't know, Beef Wellington is probably, he's long retired, but Sami Zayn was not nearly as good of a wrestler as he is now. But basically, my brother would go to wrestling school and learn, and then he'd showed me at our Taekwondo school, like how we learned things to do things properly. And of course, we had just been winging it, doing backyard wrestling and stuff together. And like what you figure out from backyard wrestling a lot of the times, unless you're just hitting each other over the head with trash cans, you're going to get kind of close to what it is. I mean, you see a suplex and it's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
So as long as you do it enough times to get comfortable doing it, that's a big part of learning to be a pro wrestler. But so I learned to bump, learned to do, basic chain wrestling, arm drags, all that on the puzzle mats at our Taekwondo school. And then the IWS school shut down, and when I became 16 and old enough to like start taking professional wrestling, there was a promotion called MWF. And basically, the training was we would go on a Friday when the show was on Saturday. We'd set up the ring, and we'd just do matches and kind of mess around in the ring for several hours. And there was very little like organization or like formal training, and it wasn't really a class. It was more just a bunch of us messing around, which was honestly a better choice than a lot of the pro wrestling training that went around then, and even that goes around now. And of course, like over the years, I was always very careful about whenever someone that was good was around before a show, asking them to show me some stuff, and trying to learn from everyone as much as I could. Unfortunately, seminars were not as much of a thing then as they are now, and then I since then I've learned from the best and trained in Mexico and Japan and given many seminars of my own. And I think so the thing is, I don't really have anyone to credit for my pro wrestling training. So there's always that question in pro wrestling of, oh, who's your trainer? Who broke you into the business? It's kind of my older brother and my Taekwondo coach is who are responsible for how I am at pro wrestling more than anyone else nowadays.
And your work ethic. I would say that's the biggest thing, is like you just get it. You go get it. But when someone, if someone who's never seen a Speedball Mike Bailey match, or has but don't know like behind the scenes stuff with this. What do you take pride in when it comes to putting together a match, or what you're bringing to the table that someone else doesn't? Right now, the big question that you put on your social media is, should this move be banned? You know what I mean? You have your off the top thing, and like what you bring with your taekwondo and your style, and just being innovative, and just how to do that. Like, I'm gonna have this moment in this match that's gonna make you go, holy shit. Like, how do you put together a Speedball Mike Bailey match, or what do you take pride in that you think that you do different than everybody else?
So that's a question that I would need like an hour and a half to fully answer. But I think the main response applies to like all pro wrestlers and like all media. Like, it's a good lesson in life if you're trying to produce anything, which is figure out what you're good at. Figure out what people want to see from you, and then just show it off as much as you can. And I think that's kind of that's the journey for most pro wrestlers, right? Is seeing what pro wrestling is and what they like, and then going, okay, I'm going to try to do that. And then, I mean, Will Ospreay, as we've hinted, is the greatest wrestler in the world, but you can't be Will Ospreay. Only Will Ospreay is Will Ospreay. But in the process of copying Will Ospreay, the goal is to try and figure out what in that you do different, and what you bring, and what makes you different. And of course, for me, I've got, it's not even high flying, but I have very specific high flying techniques that I can do better than anyone else. And it took many, many years of trying tons of different techniques to figure out what those like 4 or 5 aerial moves that I do now are, and how to use them, and how I make them better than anyone else within my presentation, and really the taekwondo and the martial arts, and how to highlight that so that it fits within professional wrestling, which is an incredibly difficult feat, which is something that I encounter a lot, and people that are going from martial arts or any other like fighting sport to professional wrestling. Professional wrestlers don't necessarily understand, judo or taekwondo or capoeira or whatever. So you have to figure out a way to make it work within professional wrestling. And that is incredibly difficult and took me years to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to put a button on it with this one here, because I do know you're limited for time, because you got some streaming to do, and I want to kind of touch on that a little bit before we get out here as well, so people know where to go find you or things you do. I always love to hear when people put other people over, and people you should have on your radar. And like I said, we kind of talked about at the beginning with Fighter Entertainment, how you're bringing these very young talent from the world of Cheeseburger School and all over the place, or even people we know very well from the GCW side of the things. Who are some names out there right now that you have worked or you've seen on the grind that you would like to, people should be aware of?
No, so that is my least favorite question.
Oh, my fault.
Because there are so many people that I should name and want to name, and I'm going to forget like 20 in the process, and I'm going to be kicking myself in the ass for it. What I should do is really write down a list for that answer that I can just look at whenever people ask it. But in terms of proximity, I mean, there's a lot of people that I have trained or had a hand in training that appeared on the Fightertainment and are doing absolutely fantastic. The Lost Boys, the 4 Lost Boys, Ethan Promise, Junie Underwood, Ryan Rise, and Miles Penn, who are, when I had a school briefly in Copley, PA, which is close to where I live, and they all joined in and got much better for it, and now they're doing absolutely fantastic now. So if you're PA area, look them up. They'll undoubtedly show up at a show near you. Journey Burke as well, who was at that school, as well as Mookie Summers, who is doing fantastic, and I've never seen someone be so ridiculously popular on the internet and get people rooting for them more than Mookie Summers. There's a lot of people that I helped train from Canada as well that you should keep an eye on. Nathan Yarimovic, who's a black belt in judo, that I helped train and is at IWS right now and is absolutely killing it. Chris Tara as well, who's a great wrestler from Canada. Alex Mays also, who will be, Christar and Alex Mays, who are amazingly sweet together, and they'll be wrestling in the U.S. very soon.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're really starting to get it together. Zach Patterson, that's a name you should look up, who's in Canada right now, and he's, I have never had a hand in training anyone that I have been so certain would end up at the top of the heap in the world of professional wrestling. But again, it's a very long list. There's a lot of people I
Yeah.
could name. There's a lot of, if you're not familiar. See, now I'm trying to see like which direction I go with this because there's so many people to name.
That's my favorite part about pro wrestling now is I was a huge pro wrestling fan and all I knew was WWE. I refused to watch anything else. I was one of those fans, where it's like WCW's on, don't you dare switch it. I'm a WWE person. Don't, yeah. But professional wrestling has turned into what I loved most about mixed martial arts and the UFC side of things. Is it was so international where it's like, oh, my favorite fighter from Canada is here. My favorite fighter from UK is here. And pro wrestling is getting to that point now too, where people think, you think of a country and you think like Canada, like you, Kenny, Jericho, Brett, you think UK, you think Osprey, I love how it's becoming so international and people from all over the world are just getting that recognition and also representing their country. And pro wrestling is getting to that almost that mixed martial arts style of things. But yes, the big thing with your if you want to answer that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely, like, I think you're 1000% correct, and I think that's what Impact is doing well. That's what I'm trying very, very hard to do with my pro wrestling. I mean, and that's the difference. You see, Kane was really, really cool, but Kane only needed to live in a 15-minute a week slice on Monday night, and then Kane disappeared, went away, and you never saw him. I think now what people want out of pro wrestling and what pro wrestlers should offer is a fully immersive experience. Where if there's a pro wrestler that you like, you can follow their career nearly 24/7. People are always on Twitter. People do, 2, 3, 4 shows a week that are kind of, they're unrelated, but it's still the same person in those matches, oftentimes in a different role with different characters. But I think that nowadays, with the way people consume professional wrestling, kayfabe, and trying to hide or conceal any aspect of it does it a great disservice. And I think people, like, no one enjoys professional wrestling more because they think it might be fake or because they don't know how it works. I think that just doesn't happen. I think when wrestling shows are good, you completely forget that they're, fake or choreographed or organized in any way. And all you do is enjoy it because it's engaging and fun and impressive. And this is a thing that I've been saying, and that I on my Twitch streams, I try very hard to be as open as I can about professional wrestling, and I'm not afraid to talk about things like how a match is made and the parts that go into it, and really get into how that process works, because this is something that I believe firmly. If you wanted to make someone a pro wrestling fan, and if you wanted to really show to an audience that isn't familiar with it how cool pro wrestling is, this is what you would show them, right? You would show them the process of a person flies in from, let's say, Mexico that only speaks Spanish, and a person flies in from Japan that only speaks Japanese. They would show up, have never met before, get in a room together, kind of just like talk and gesticulate at each other for 10-15 minutes, shake hands, walk away, and then meet in the ring 30 seconds later to present a flawlessly choreographed fight scene that works from all angles, that shows what they're good at, that engages the audience, and that is like very loosely scripted. And I think showing all people only the second half of that is not as impressive as showing the entire process.
Totally. Lifelong fan, and then going from podcasting to being backstage and seeing exactly what you talked about, but not even on an international level where they don't even know the same language, which is impressive altogether. But just like seeing two talent, like, oh, I'm a 10-year veteran versus this is my 16th match, and they put something together in 15 minutes. And I've listened to try to see how how they talk or put it together. I would never be able to remember 90% of that. And it's just like, man, as a lifelong fan, then just see that moment, to me, is like, if more people knew that, Like it's like watching musicians, and then a musician goes up and picks up a guitar and just can look at the other guy's fingers and be like, oh, he's in this chord, this tempo, and can play with a band seamlessly. Like that's what makes an industry special. Is like that, and it shows the talent of that, which is so good. But you alluded to your Twitch channel, so people can go over to @Speedball Mike Bailey over on Twitch. What are some things they can expect from your Twitch side of things?
Oh, sorry. I just actually switched the. This is me
You're
almost going to my. I'm getting ready to cue it up. But we mostly watch pro wrestling. We do a bunch of other things, and we'll get sidetracked and talk about anything. But in my Discord, 90% of what we do, people send in matches, and we watch them. Sometimes they're my own matches. Sometimes they're whatever is good that aired on TV. I try to show matches from all over the world. I try to introduce people to new wrestlers that I like. My favorite thing is when people send me in their own matches, wrestlers that are starting out, and we'll watch it, and I'll happily give them feedback and advice on everything. But yeah, it's just fully unconcealed talking about professional wrestling completely openly in the way that I enjoy it. I feel like wrongfully pro wrestling gets like the wrong sides of pro wrestling get romanticized when you listen books about guys shooting on each other, and really that doesn't happen anymore, man. It's just like-minded people trying to put on a good performance and create good art and express themselves, and that's really what you get out of pro wrestling nowadays, and that's what we talk about on my Twitch stream.
Well, make sure you go follow that and join the Discord. I'll have all the links below so you can support Speedball Mike Bailey. Mike, thank you so much for this. That means the absolute world to me. I think so highly of you, of like I said, your work ethic and what you bring to this industry, and how you're selfless in helping the next generation get that experience through you, or that platform on your Twitch, or on Fighter Entertainment, on those aspects where you help that next generation get better and get more eyes on them. You're a hero in this industry, and I respect the hell out of you. Anywhere else people could find you, or anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Oh man, I feel like I still have like 100 different things I want to talk about, so
We
we're
could
gonna
always
have
do a
to
part
do
two.
this
I'm
again
always down if
soon,
you're down.
right? A couple months from now, when I have another big match coming up that needs to be hyped up, we'll certainly do it again. But no, watch Impact Wrestling. You know @Speedball Bailey everywhere: TikTok, Instagram, my YouTube channel, my twitch.tv/Speedball Bailey. But the number one thing that I need you to do for me right now, if you aren't already a Speedball Mike Bailey fan or already an Impact Wrestling fan, is just go on YouTube, type in there Speedball Mike Bailey Impact versus, and just pick any match and watch it. And if you like it, then subscribe to the channel and just browse through the Impact YouTube channel a little bit more, and you give it a shot. If you like it, then say it. I think audiences of any, like, music, wrestling, sports, theater, anything at all, do not realize just how huge and important their voices are. And if you like something and you say it, it always ends up making a difference.
Totally agree. That's the best way to end it there. Everyone, please go check out the links below to support Speedball Mike Bailey and all of his endeavors, and make sure you follow those channels. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time on the ABJ Podcast. This has been episode 93 with Speedball Mike Bailey. Here's some music by the Converse Kid. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.